In a world where power and prejudice collide, a shocking scandal emerges that will change the fate of a prestigious corporation forever. Within the bustling corridors of a modern corporate empire, where success is measured not only by profit, but by the influence wielded by its top executives, a storm of controversy began to brew as long-hidden recordings and confidential testimonies revealed that the company's revered chief executive officer had, over the course of many years, engaged in reprehensible behavior by making racist remarks against black employees, remarks that were recorded during private meetings and casual office gatherings, and that painted a disturbing picture of a culture steeped in discrimination and entitlement. These damning recordings, once leaked to the public, ignited a wildfire of outrage that rapidly spread across social media, traditional news outlets, and amongst the ranks of the company's workforce, forcing employees who had long suffered in silence to step forward and share their painful experiences of humiliation, marginalization, and systemic injustice that had been allowed to flourish unchecked behind closed doors. And as the scandal escalated to a point where no amount of damage control could hide the truth, the once untouchable image of the CEO began to crumble, exposing not only his individual failings, but also the deep-seated cultural rot that had permeated the highest levels of the organization. It was during these tumultuous early days, as the company's board of directors scrambled to manage the rapidly evolving crisis and to mitigate the reputational damage that threatened to engulf the entire enterprise, that an unexpected figure emerged to alter the course of events. A figure known for his polarizing style and decisive interventions in moments of national significance, none other than Donald Trump, whose arrival on the scene was both a surprise and a turning point, for his decision to step into the fray and to publicly condemn the CEO's racist behavior was seen as nothing short of revolutionary. And it was in a series of high-pressure boardroom meetings, held in an atmosphere thick with tension and heavy with the collective expectation of justice, that Trump made his presence felt with a calm, yet uncompromising authority, declaring that no individual, regardless of their status or previous achievements, should be allowed to perpetuate an environment where prejudice and discrimination were tolerated. And as his words echoed off the sleek, modern walls of the corporate headquarters, they instilled a sense of hope among those who had been wronged and sparked an immediate chain reaction that reverberated far beyond the confines of the boardroom. With his unmistakable conviction and his signature blend of showmanship and resolve, Trump's intervention was not merely a reaction to the scandal, but a deliberate, bold act aimed at redefining the ethical boundaries within corporate America, and his public denunciation of the CEO was accompanied by an announcement that the offender would face immediate removal from his position, a decision that sent shockwaves through the company, leaving employees, investors, and industry insiders grappling with the implications of such an unprecedented move, while also raising profound questions about the broader issues of accountability, diversity, and the responsibilities of leadership in a time when public scrutiny of corporate practices had reached an all-time high. As the news of Trump's involvement spread like wildfire, it quickly became the subject of intense debate and analysis, with commentators and analysts dissecting every word and gesture. And while some hailed his action as a necessary corrective measure that signified a long-overdue commitment to justice and equality, others speculated whether his intervention was a calculated political maneuver designed to shift the narrative in a way that would resonate with his base. Yet, regardless of the underlying motives, the fact remained that the scandal had forced the entire organization to confront a legacy of racism that had been concealed by a veneer of professionalism and success. And as the internal investigation was launched with unprecedented urgency, more victims came forward with harrowing accounts of sustained discrimination, each testimony adding a new layer of complexity to a case that was rapidly evolving from a matter of individual misconduct into a systemic crisis that threatened to upend not only the company's leadership but also its very identity as a bastion of modern business practice. Within this charged environment, every detail, from the hushed conversations in deserted corridors to the explosive revelations made during heated board meetings, served as a stark reminder that true leadership was not defined by the accumulation of power or wealth, but by the courage to face uncomfortable truths and to implement meaningful change in the face of adversity. And it was precisely this ideal that galvanized the voices of the marginalized employees who had long been sidelined and silenced, transforming their private suffering into a public demand for reform that resonated with a nation increasingly intolerant of injustice and discrimination in any form. As Trump's bold pronouncement reverberated across the company's executive floors, it became clear that his intervention was not an isolated event, but rather the catalyst for a profound transformation within the organization, one that promised to dismantle the toxic legacy of racism and to lay the foundation for a more inclusive and equitable future. And in the days that followed, as the company embarked on a comprehensive internal review that would expose further instances of misconduct and force a reckoning with its own cultural failings, the stakes continued to rise, and every stakeholder, from high-ranking executives to everyday employees, found themselves confronted with the stark reality that the battle for justice was far from over, for the wounds inflicted by years of systemic discrimination ran deep, and healing them would require not only punitive measures against the culpable individuals, but also a radical reimagining of the policies, values, and practices that had long governed the corporate sphere. Thus, the stage was set for a narrative that was as much about personal accountability as it was about a collective commitment to change. And as the echoes of that historic boardroom decision reverberated through the corridors of power, they carried with them the promise of a new era in which the principles of fairness, respect, and integrity would no longer be subservient to the interests of the few, but would instead form the cornerstone of an organizational culture that celebrated diversity and championed justice, a transformation that, while fraught with challenges and uncertainty, offered a beacon of hope to all those who had been deprived of their dignity and whose voices had been drowned out by the din of corporate ambition. In this pivotal moment, as the fallout from the scandal began to reshape the very fabric of the company, the actions taken by Donald Trump emerged as a rallying cry for reform, a clarion call that demanded not only the expulsion of the offending CEO, but also a comprehensive overhaul of the entrenched systems that had allowed such abuses to thrive. And as the first chapter of this unfolding saga drew to a close, the narrative left an indelible impression on everyone who had witnessed the events, setting the stage for the next phase of a journey that promised to delve even deeper into the complexities of power, prejudice, and the relentless pursuit of justice. And it was with this resolute spirit and unwavering commitment to accountability that the organization prepared to face its darkest hour, determined to emerge stronger, wiser, and more dedicated than ever to the cause of eradicating discrimination and to forging a future where every individual was afforded the respect and opportunity they deserved. Following that monumental decision, the corporate landscape was thrust into a period of intense introspection and upheaval as internal investigations were launched with unyielding determination to uncover every instance of misconduct hidden behind layers of bureaucratic indifference and corporate complicity. Employees, emboldened by the public outcry and Trump's bold intervention, gathered in hushed meetings along dimly lit corridors and in quiet offices where they shared their long-held, painful experiences of humiliation, discrimination, and silent suffering under the oppressive leadership of a man who had once been regarded as untouchable. And as these clandestine conversations grew in number and intensity, the company's human resources department found itself inundated with both formal complaints and informal accounts, each piece of evidence serving as a stark reminder of a deeply flawed system that had prioritized profit over people for far too long. As the investigation deepened, senior executives who had previously defended the CEO began to distance themselves, fearful that their own careers might soon be jeopardized by the relentless pursuit of truth and accountability. And in a series of urgent boardroom sessions, legal advisors, compliance officers, and external auditors meticulously combed through reams of internal emails, confidential recordings, and sensitive documents, piecing together a timeline that revealed a systematic campaign of prejudice that spanned several years. And while the corporate leadership wrestled with the implications of these damning revelations, media outlets, both traditional and digital, seized upon the story with fervor, broadcasting every new development with a blend of incisive analysis and unrestrained emotion. And as the scandal reverberated across social networks with trending hashtags and impassioned commentaries, the public demanded not only retribution for the past, but also comprehensive reforms to ensure that such abuses would never again be tolerated. Consequently, the narrative began to shift from the misdeeds of a single individual to a broader indictment of a corporate culture that had long turned a blind eye to discrimination in exchange for financial gain and market dominance. And as the investigation progressed, it became increasingly evident that the CEO's actions were symptomatic of a larger, systemic failure that had allowed toxic behaviors to flourish unchecked, a realization that spurred the board to consider radical reforms, including the implementation of stringent anti-discrimination policies, the introduction of mandatory diversity and sensitivity training programs, and the establishment of an independent oversight committee charged with monitoring workplace conduct. And amid the mounting pressure, a group of long-silenced employees emerged as unexpected leaders, transforming their personal anguish into a unified call for accountability and change that resonated with a broader audience and compelled even the most reluctant stakeholders to acknowledge that the status quo was no longer acceptable. In this charged atmosphere of transformation, Donald Trump's earlier intervention assumed an even greater significance as his decisive actions were interpreted not merely as punitive measures against a single individual, but as a powerful declaration that the era of impunity for discriminatory practices was drawing to a close. And in a series of televised interviews and carefully worded public statements, Trump reiterated his unwavering commitment to the principles of equality and justice, asserting that his decision to remove the CEO was rooted in a deep belief that every employee, regardless of background or circumstance, deserved to work in an environment free from prejudice and fear. And his words, delivered with both resolute determination and an unmistakable empathy for those who had suffered, resonated profoundly with many who had long endured injustice, lending renewed momentum to the reform efforts now sweeping the company. As the board began to implement a series of immediate measures designed to address the crisis, including the suspension of certain high-ranking officials and the launch of a comprehensive review of existing corporate policies, the atmosphere within the headquarters shifted markedly from one of uncertainty to a blend of somber reflection and cautious optimism. For while there was deep mourning for the years of systemic discrimination, there also emerged a palpable sense of hope that the painful lessons of the past could pave the way for a future in which integrity, respect, and accountability would form the very foundation of the corporate culture. And as employees, investors, and industry analysts observed these rapid changes, every whispered conversation in the hallways and every determined glance exchanged between colleagues was imbued with the understanding that they were witnessing a pivotal moment in the company's history. Over the ensuing weeks, as additional evidence came to light and more victims courageously stepped forward to share their harrowing accounts, the scandal began to cast an ever-lengthening shadow over not only the company, but the entire industry, prompting other corporations to initiate their own internal audits and to re-examine long-standing practices in the hope of rooting out similar abuses. And in doing so, the repercussions of the CEO's misconduct sparked a nationwide dialogue about leadership, accountability, and the ethical responsibilities of those entrusted with power in an increasingly scrutinized business environment. Throughout this turbulent period, the company's board and management found themselves at a crossroads, forced to confront the painful legacy of their past in order to rebuild trust with a workforce that had been marginalized and a public that demanded transparency and justice. And every decision made in the wake of the scandal was weighed carefully against the need to restore credibility and to implement lasting reforms that would prevent any recurrence of such abuse. As discussions in boardrooms grew more fervent and the pace of the investigation accelerated, the realization that the CEO's actions were but a symptom of a far deeper malaise began to crystallize, and it became clear that true reform would require a radical overhaul of the corporate culture, one that would dismantle entrenched power structures and replace them with systems that celebrated diversity, nurtured inclusion, and safeguarded the dignity of every employee. And in this context, the legacy of the scandal evolved into a broader struggle for justice that transcended the confines of one company and resonated deeply with a society increasingly intolerant of discrimination and injustice in any form. As the company's internal review uncovered further layers of misconduct and systemic bias, the voices of those who had long been silenced grew louder, urging not only punitive action against the perpetrators, but also a comprehensive reimagining of the policies and practices that had allowed such toxic behavior to persist. And in a series of emotionally charged press conferences, board members acknowledged the profound failures of the past while outlining ambitious plans for a future defined by transparency, accountability, and unwavering respect for every individual. And it was in these defining moments that the true cost of neglecting ethical standards became painfully apparent, serving as a stark reminder that the pursuit of profit at the expense of human dignity was a path that would ultimately lead to the downfall of even the most prestigious institutions. As the investigation continued to unravel the full extent of the CEO's misconduct and the intricate web of collusion that had protected him for so long, the company braced itself for a protracted battle, not only in the court of public opinion, but also in legal arenas where the rights of the victims would be vindicated and the failures of corporate oversight would be laid bare for all to see. And in this fraught and uncertain climate, every new development, every revelation, and every act of courageous whistleblowing added another chapter to an unfolding saga that was transforming the very nature of corporate accountability in modern society. A transformation driven by the collective resolve of those who refuse to accept injustice and by leaders like Donald Trump, whose bold actions had set in motion a chain of events that promised to redefine the ethical landscape of business for generations to come. As the investigation advanced further and the corporate headquarters, still reeling from the impact of Trump's decisive intervention, found itself engulfed in a rigorous internal overhaul, the atmosphere within the organization became charged with an urgency that permeated every corner of the building, from the hushed discussions in boardrooms to the anxious whispers in deserted corridors. Every employee sensed that this was a turning point that would irrevocably alter the company's future, and it was in this climate of heightened scrutiny and transformative resolve that new layers of evidence emerged, each one adding to the mounting dossier of documented misconduct that had been concealed for years by a combination of fear, complicity, and the misguided prioritization of profit over principle. Detailed interviews with long-serving staff revealed personal accounts of isolation, overt humiliation, and systematic marginalization, painting a stark picture of an environment in which discriminatory practices were not anomalies, but rather the norm. And as these revelations spread both internally into the public domain, the board of directors resolved to leave no aspect of the systemic failure unexamined by commissioning independent audits, engaging external legal experts, and implementing comprehensive policy reviews to identify and eradicate the cultural rot that had allowed such misconduct to flourish. During this tumultuous period, employees who had once suffered in silence now found their voices amplified as they joined together to demand not only accountability for the wrongdoers, but also the implementation of far-reaching reforms that would ensure every individual in the company was treated with dignity and respect. And as the company prepared to unveil a series of new initiatives, including the establishment of an independent oversight committee, the introduction of mandatory diversity and sensitivity training programs, and the revision of internal protocols to guarantee transparent reporting and swift action against any form of discrimination, the public response was swift and overwhelmingly supportive, with industry analysts, civil rights advocates, and even previously skeptical shareholders praising the bold steps being taken to restore trust and integrity within the organization. Meanwhile, Donald Trump's role, which had initially centered on the expulsion of the offending chief executive officer, evolved into a broader emblem of the fight against entrenched injustice. As his subsequent public addresses and appearances at high-profile industry forums underscored his unwavering commitment to ethical leadership, and his continued commentary on the unfolding events served to remind all stakeholders that true authority was measured not by wealth or influence, but by the courage to confront and correct wrongdoing. In a series of televised interviews, Trump reiterated that his intervention was not merely punitive, but a necessary corrective measure designed to signal that discrimination in any form would no longer be tolerated, a message that resonated deeply with a nation increasingly intolerant of injustice. And as his words reverberated across news cycles and social media platforms, they provided both solace and inspiration to those who had long endured systemic bias, while simultaneously pressuring other corporate leaders to re-examine their own practices in light of the growing chorus of demands for accountability. As the internal review continued, it became apparent that the scandal was symptomatic of a much larger malaise that extended beyond the actions of a single individual, prompting the board to confront uncomfortable truths about long-standing policies and practices that had enabled a culture of discrimination to persist unchecked. And in a series of heated internal debates, Senior executives who had once defended the status quo found themselves forced to reckon with the ethical and moral implications of their inaction, ultimately acknowledging that meaningful reform required not only the dismissal of culpable figures, but also a fundamental reimagining of the organization's core values and operating principles. In this context, the narrative shifted from one of isolated misconduct to a comprehensive campaign for change, as whistleblowers and reform advocates united to call for transparency, fairness, and restorative justice, and as the legal ramifications of the scandal began to unfold, with multiple lawsuits filed by former employees alleging that the company had not only tolerated but actively perpetuated a hostile work environment, the pressure to institute lasting change intensified, leaving no room for half measures or superficial fixes. Concurrently, the company's stock experienced significant volatility as investors weighed the potential long-term impact of the scandal against the promise of a rejuvenated, more ethically driven corporate culture. And while some expressed concern over short-term financial repercussions, others saw the reform measures as a necessary investment in the organization's future stability and reputation. A sentiment that was echoed by market analysts who noted that true accountability and ethical governance would ultimately serve to strengthen the company's standing in an increasingly conscientious global marketplace. As the reform process gained momentum, the media continued to play a pivotal role in shaping public perception, with investigative journalists and expert commentators delving into the intricacies of the case and drawing connections between the company's internal failings and broader societal issues of inequality and injustice. And every new exposé, every detailed analysis, further underscored the imperative for systemic change not only within this single organization but across the entire corporate sector, inspiring other companies to conduct their own internal audits and to confront uncomfortable truths about their cultures and practices. Within this dynamic and ever-evolving landscape, every stakeholder, from the highest echelons of management to the rank-and-file employees, became acutely aware that the pursuit of justice was an ongoing, collective endeavor, one that required sustained vigilance, transparent communication, and an unwavering commitment to upholding the principles of fairness and respect. And it was in this spirit that the company embarked on a comprehensive journey of transformation, one that sought to redress past wrongs, rebuild trust, and create a new paradigm of corporate accountability that would serve as a benchmark for ethical governance for years to come. As the narrative of the scandal continued to develop, the convergence of legal challenges, internal reforms, and public advocacy coalesced into a powerful movement that not only aimed to dismantle the legacy of racism within the organization, but also aspired to set a precedent for how corporations should respond when confronted with the deep-seated injustices of their past. And in doing so, it sent a resounding message that the time for complacency and denial had passed, and that every individual, regardless of their position or influence, was subject to the same standards of accountability and respect. In the midst of these transformative efforts, the company also initiated outreach programs to support the victims of discrimination, offering not only financial compensation and professional assistance, but also the promise of long-term institutional changes that would safeguard against any recurrence of similar abuses. And as these programs were rolled out, they were met with gratitude and cautious optimism by those who had suffered the most, serving as a tangible demonstration of the organization's commitment to healing and reconciliation. Furthermore, as the story continued to unfold in real time, it became evident that the ripple effects of this scandal were being felt far beyond the confines of the corporate world, sparking a national dialogue on issues of systemic racism, leadership responsibility, and the transformative potential of accountability. And in this broader context, every action taken by the company, every policy revision, every public statement, every legal filing, assumed significance not only as a means of corporate self-preservation, but also as a beacon of hope for a society determined to overcome the scars of discrimination and to build a future rooted in equality and justice. Thus, as the internal investigations progressed and the implementation of far-reaching reforms gathered pace, the company found itself at the crossroads of a profound transformation, one in which the lessons of a painful past were being harnessed to forge a path toward a more inclusive and equitable future. And it was in this moment of intense introspection and resolute determination that the narrative of the scandal entered a new chapter, marked by the collective resolve of a community united in its demand for justice and the unwavering belief that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, the pursuit of truth and accountability would ultimately prevail, setting the stage for a new era of corporate integrity and ethical leadership that would serve as an enduring testament to the power of courageous action and the fight against systemic injustice. Continuing from the transformative reforms that had swept through the organization, the final phase of this unfolding drama encapsulates the enduring impact of decisive leadership and the collective commitment to justice that has redefined corporate culture. In the months following the dramatic dismissal of the discredited chief executive officer, the company embarked on a journey of profound introspection and comprehensive transformation, instituting rigorous measures that left no room for the prejudices of the past. And under the vigilant oversight of an independent committee, every aspect of the corporate structure underwent meticulous review, with a focus on establishing transparent communication channels, enforcing robust diversity and sensitivity training programs, and creating secure mechanisms for employees to report misconduct without fear of reprisal. Employees who had long suffered in silence now found their voices empowered as they actively engaged in open forums and constructive dialogues, thereby fostering a culture of mutual trust and solidarity that gradually replaced the old environment of fear and exclusion. And as these initiatives took firm root, the organization witnessed a remarkable renewal of spirit and a collective determination to uphold the values of fairness and respect, setting the stage for a future defined by integrity and ethical excellence. As public confidence in the company was steadily restored, external observers and industry experts noted that the reforms implemented were not merely reactive measures, but a deliberate effort to transform the legacy of systemic injustice into an opportunity for lasting positive change. And as the organization advanced its internal audits and revised its policies to ensure sustained accountability, the broader business community took note, with several other corporations initiating similar reviews and pledges to enhance workplace diversity and inclusion, inspired by the exemplary response to the scandal. During this period of renewal, the company established strategic partnerships with non-governmental organizations and community groups dedicated to championing social justice, resulting in outreach programs, educational initiatives, and policy advocacy efforts that extended the impact of internal reforms well beyond corporate boundaries, thereby contributing to a broader societal shift towards equity and respect. Furthermore, the improved governance and ethical practices led to tangible benefits for the organization, as investor confidence was gradually restored and financial performance stabilized, a development that was reflected in more favorable market valuations and renewed trust among stakeholders. And this economic recovery was seen as a direct consequence of the company's commitment to ethical principles, reinforcing the notion that responsible governance and social justice are intrinsically linked and mutually reinforcing. In parallel with these positive developments, academic institutions and industry forums began to study the case as a landmark example of how proactive accountability measures and courageous leadership can drive systemic reform, with conferences and seminars convened to analyze the lessons learned and explore ways to replicate the success in other sectors. And the resulting discussions underscored the importance of continuous improvement and vigilance in preventing the recurrence of discriminatory practices. As the organization embraced its new identity, the legacy of the scandal was gradually transformed from one of shame and controversy into a source of inspiration and a blueprint for the future. And this metamorphosis was celebrated through public events and internal ceremonies that honored the courage of those who had spoken out and recognized the efforts of leaders who had taken bold steps to rectify past wrongs. Throughout this process, the importance of transparency, integrity, and open dialogue remained paramount, and every milestone achieved was meticulously documented and shared with the wider community, ensuring that the journey toward justice was visible to all and served as a reminder that true transformation requires persistent effort and unwavering commitment. Now, as the narrative draws to a close, the organization stands as a testament to the power of accountability and the transformative impact of ethical governance, with its new policies and cultural shifts setting a standard for others to follow. And as it moves forward, the company is poised to serve as a beacon of hope and a model for systemic change in the modern business landscape. It is in this spirit of renewal and progress that the final chapter of this saga invites every viewer and stakeholder to reflect on the lessons learned and to recognize that the fight for justice extends far beyond the confines of any single institution, and that every act of courage and every decision taken in the name of fairness has the potential to inspire widespread change and to create a legacy that transcends individual transgressions. Therefore, as you have witnessed this remarkable journey from scandal to reform, we invite you to join us in the ongoing pursuit of justice by actively engaging in the conversation, sharing your thoughts and ideas on how we can collectively build a more inclusive and equitable future, and supporting initiatives that promote accountability and ethical leadership, because together our voices can drive the transformation needed to ensure that no act of discrimination is ever tolerated again, and that every person is afforded the respect and dignity they inherently deserve. If you believe in the power of change and are inspired by this story of redemption and reform, please share this message with others. Subscribe for further updates on similar transformative journeys, and become part of a community dedicated to championing justice and ethical leadership. For it is through collective action and a shared commitment to these ideals that we can truly make a difference and ensure that the legacy of this chapter serves as a catalyst for ongoing positive change.